A man who spends 15 to 20 hours a day working his own land just told the world something no farmer wants to admit. It doesn't matter how hard you work anymore. You can wake up at 4 in the morning, harvest until midnight, do everything textbook perfect, and still walk away with nothing. That man is Jeremy Clarkson. And this year, on 200 acres of his own farm, he made a decision that would have been unthinkable to him 5 years ago. He planted nothing at all. This isn't a story about a celebrity's hobby farm struggling for headlines. This is what it looks like when one of the most stubborn, most publicly invested farmers in Britain finally says, out loud, that the system doesn't work anymore. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why, and why it matters far beyond one 1,000-acre plot in the Cotswolds. Let's start with the number that should stop you in your tracks. 200 acres. That's roughly 150 football pitches of usable farmland, sitting completely bare this year at Diddley Squat Farm. Not because of drought, not because of flooding, not because Clarkson got lazy. He left it empty on purpose, because the math simply didn't work. In his own words, farmers have reached a point where making money from growing food has become, in his phrase, quite simply impossible. Read that again. Not difficult, not risky, impossible. That's not the language of someone complaining about a bad season. That's the language of someone who has run the numbers over and over and arrived at the same brutal conclusion every time. Here's the logic behind it. To plant wheat or barley across those 200 acres, Clarkson would need to pay for seed, fertilizer, diesel, machinery maintenance, insurance, and labor, all before a single grain reaches a buyer. Input costs for UK arable farming have climbed dramatically over the past few years. Fertilizer prices spiked after global supply shocks, fuel costs rose, and machinery parts became both more expensive and harder to source. Meanwhile, the price farmers actually get paid for their wheat and barley hasn't kept pace. In some cases, it's fallen. So the equation becomes simple and devastating. Spend money to grow a crop, harvest that crop successfully, sell that crop, and still end up in the red. When an experienced landowner with access to professional agronomists, modern equipment, and a media platform to warn people concludes that the only rational move is to plant nothing, that's not a personal failure. That's a system failure. And Clarkson didn't stop there. He used his platform to call for urgent government action, arguing that without intervention, this isn't just his problem. It's the beginning of a much larger collapse across British agriculture. Now let's talk about what impossible actually looks like day to day, because the financial story is only half of it. During harvest season, Clarkson has described waking at 4 in the morning and working non-stop for 15 to 20 hours at a stretch. Think about that schedule for a moment. That's not a long shift. That's nearly the entire day, repeated for weeks, in physically demanding conditions: dust, heat, machinery breakdowns, unpredictable weather windows that can close in hours. Farmers can't take the harvest off. They can't reschedule it around a holiday or a family event. The crop dictates the calendar, not the other way around. Clarkson has pointed out that this unpredictability is part of what makes farming so brutal on a personal level. You genuinely don't know when the harvest window will open, so plans, holidays, and normal life get built around a season that refuses to be scheduled. And here's the gut punch. After all of that, the 4 a.m. starts, the 20-hour days, the physical toll. He says the crop still doesn't guarantee him an income. He's pointed to a particularly harsh stretch where a hot summer produced one of the worst harvests in recent memory, with yields dropping by as much as 40% in his region. Naturally, you'd expect that scarcity to push prices up. Basic supply and demand, right? Except it didn't work that way. While parts of Northern Europe suffered poor yields, the rest of the world had a strong harvest. Global grain markets don't care about your local drought. They care about total worldwide supply. So even in a year when Clarkson's own yield collapsed, the global market was flooded with grain from elsewhere, and prices stayed low or fell further. He worked harder, produced less, and got paid less for it. That combination, maximum effort, minimum reward, is precisely why he's now openly saying it would be financially smarter to skip the harvest entirely and go on an expensive holiday instead. That's not a joke landing for laughs. That's a farmer doing the arithmetic and discovering that leisure is now cheaper than labor. It would be easy to write this off as one wealthy celebrity's PR complaint. He's not exactly short of money. His farm shop, his TV deals, and his other ventures have made him a very rich man. So why should anyone care that his wheat field is empty? Because Clarkson isn't the exception here. He's the best-case scenario. He has resources that a typical family farm doesn't. A media platform, top-tier agronomists, capital reserves, and a television show generating separate revenue that can subsidize losses elsewhere. If someone with all of those advantages is concluding that arable farming doesn't pencil out, imagine the position of a farmer with none of that cushion, no alternative income, no camera crew, no column in a national newspaper to call for policy change. This is why Clarkson's statements have resonated so strongly within the farming community itself, not just with his television audience. Agricultural groups have been raising the same alarm for years. Shrinking subsidy support as post-EU transitional payments wind down, rising input costs that show no sign of falling, added regulatory and environmental compliance costs tied to net zero targets, and looming changes to inheritance tax rules on agricultural property that threaten how family farms get passed down to the next generation. Clarkson has even floated where he thinks this is heading if nothing changes. Landowners renting out their fields not for food, but for anaerobic digesters processing energy crops, or for solar farms, or increasingly, for data centers. Read that list again. Data centers. Not because farmers want to give up growing food, but because non-food uses of land are starting to pay better than food itself. That should be an uncomfortable sentence for anyone who eats. So what does someone in Clarkson's position actually do when the traditional playbook stops working? He doesn't fold entirely. He pivots. This year, Clarkson has openly said that diddly squat isn't doing what he calls real farming, in the traditional sense. Wheat and barley, the crops that once anchored the whole operation, have been sidelined because, in his own blunt assessment, there's simply no point growing something guaranteed to lose money. Instead, he's redirected effort toward smaller, more unconventional ventures. One example, rabbit farming. The reasoning is oddly logical once you hear it. He noticed that UK restaurants were importing rabbit meat from France, meaning there's clear domestic demand not being met by domestic supply. Rather than compete in an oversaturated, low-margin commodity market like wheat,